Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Rhett Butler, the founder of Mongabay, which is a conservation news site that has a special focus on tropical rainforests. And we're here today because it's World Rainforest Day, and we're talking about how to restore the rainforests. So obviously, the past few months have been a very tumultuous time in most places around the world. And it may seem that rainforests should be a distant concern right now, but there are actually real tie-ins between what's happening in our own communities and what's happening in rainforests. For example, indigenous communities and communities of color are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, and racist and inequitable systems. One of the reasons that the Black Lives Movement is resonating around the world, Black Lives Matters is resonating around the world, is historically marginalized communities from Papuans in Indonesia to indigenous peoples in the Amazon are also experiencing systematic and systemic discrimination and persecution, as well as environmental injustice. The organizations presenting today are tackling these issues and the climate crisis by protecting and restoring rainforests in partnership with local communities and indigenous peoples. They recognize that no one challenge can be addressed in a silo, so they've taken distinct and holistic approaches to conservation. Their work is absolutely critical at this moment in time, as rainforests are fast disappearing, but yet are critical to the health of people in forests and the planet as a whole. So all of our speakers are very accomplished. We have full biographies of them on the website. So I'll just quickly introduce each of our participants and their title, and then we can get into more details on their background in the discussion. So we have Dr. Kinnari Webb, who's the founder of Health and Harmony. We have Dika Putra, who's the program director of Alam Sehat Lestari, Project Asri Medical Center. We have Dr. Vic Mohan, who's the medical director at Blue Ventures. We have Carmeli Llano Sanchez, the program director at International Animal Rescue. And we have Dr. Cheryl Knott, the founder of the Gunung Palung Orangutan Conservation Project. So to get started, I'd love to go to each of you and hear a little bit about your specific approach to conservation and what makes it holistic and distinct. So Kinnari, we'll start with you.
So it feels to me like the COVID pandemic has illustrated for us all something that I've been trying to teach the world, it feels like, for 20 years, that all of our well-beings are intertwined. And when I say all, I mean the well-being of humans all over the world and the well-being of the natural ecosystem. And so that's what we do. We work at that intersection of human and environmental health. And boy, can we see what happens when we're not nurturing and caring for that intersection. I'll just let you, we'll have lots of time to talk, so I'll let other people talk too.
Great, thanks, Kinnari. So Dika, can we hear from you?
Yeah, just echoing what Kinnari has been said. ASRI is actually the implementations of what Kinnari's believe in, that, you know, human health and the health of ecosystems are intertwined. And program at ASRI is actually built up based on the solutions that comes from a community who wanted to protect the forest, but they couldn't. So, you know, we asking communities on what they would be needed in order to protect the rainforest, and they came up with the solutions, and then we are implementing that solutions. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So Vic, Blue Ventures is partnering now with Health and Harmony and ASRI. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Hi, Rhett, thank you. Hello, everybody. We're not partnering with ASRI yet, but we are edging ever closer, I hope.
Okay.
So we're actually a marine conservation organization. We work with tropical coastal communities to rebuild fisheries and to safeguard marine ecosystems, and that includes tropical mangrove ecosystems is a big part of the work that we do. And we hold exactly the same beliefs that Dika and Kinnari have articulated about the interconnection between human and environmental well-being. We try and think holistically about the needs of communities and the threats that marine ecosystems face. I guess what makes us unique is we lead with livelihoods, because that's the need that communities often articulate the most loudly or clearly or initially when we work with them. So we work to help them to rebuild fisheries, and that catalyzes community-led conservation by demonstrating that marine management pays in short-term, through short-term fisheries measures. We demonstrate the value of effective management of marine resources and coastal ecosystems. That leads on to more ambitious management of marine ecosystems. We then support them to get legal systems in place to protect those ecosystems from external fishes and so on. And then we think holistically about the other needs that they have. So we support them to develop alternative livelihoods to fishing, reducing pressure on marine ecosystems, and we support them to address their health needs, which often comes up very early and serves as a poor health often serves as a barrier to them engaging in conservation. So it's fisheries management, marine ecosystem, alternative livelihoods, and health as a holistic package to address communities' needs, very much in the same way that Kinnari and Dika have articulated. Thanks.
Thanks, Vic. So Carmeli and Cheryl, I think of you as being more on the spectrum of working directly with wildlife. So Carmeli, to start with you, can you tell us a little bit more about your work?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. So we basically try to save animals from forests that are still being decimated. I think we are definitely living an environmental crisis, an unprecedented environmental crisis. Climate change is just getting worse. Now we are in the middle of a pandemic. We are just destroying the world more and more. I think now is more than, it's so important right now to protect the forests that we still have left. We can think of how we are gonna restore the forest. We can think of how we are gonna try to find solutions to climate change, but I think there's nothing more important than protecting the forest that we still have left. So I think that's why when we are trying to save animals, the only way to save them is protecting their habitat, their home. So that's why it's a holistic approach, because we started just thinking of how we save these individual animals, but right now what we are doing is protecting the entire forest, where there's not only orangutans and other primates, but also so many other species that some of them you can only find in the forest in Indonesia, in Borneo specifically. But also, I think I have to agree so much with Dr. Kinnari. The work that we do is so important, because you can't separate the environment from the humans, from the animals. We are all in one ecosystem. We are all in one planet. And I think if the only way to protect humans and to really preserve the health of humans is preserving the whole ecosystem.
Thanks, Carmeli. Cheryl, can we hear from you?
Sure. Of course, want to reiterate what everyone else already mentioned about the importance of preserving rainforests. And as Carmeli said, I think our emphasis is really on trying to protect wild orangutans in their habitat. So what GPOCP does is we combine 28 years of cutting-edge scientific research on orangutans with 20 years of community-based conservation. So we apply international scientific expertise to solve global issues in a local context. One of our strengths of our organization is that our staff are primarily local Indonesians who understand the local context, and thus they're accepted by their communities where they can work effectively to bring about that conservation change. And so we work continuously with local communities to understand, to their context, their cultural context, and to work with them on long-term solutions. So asking them directly, what issues, how they think we should solve the conservation issues and what they're willing to do. For example, we work to find sustainable alternatives to illegal logging and cutting down of rainforests to plant crops. And some of these solutions include organic farming methods, fish farming, making product to sell out of sustainable non-timber forest plants. And so we work with the communities to find out what will work for them and then help them develop expertise to implement these solutions. We also really stress peer-to-peer learning, so creating livelihood groups where people can help each other, and have these groups be self-sustaining. So I think it's really important that people aren't just dependent on outside experts, but really helping local communities to develop their own expertise. And also really leveraging our work on running one of the longest orangutan research programs in the world, and that scientific knowledge to help inform local people and government officials, and to help guide government decisions and policymaking about orangutan habitat. So just really combining research and conservation, and that those are interconnected, and striving to kind of bridge those gaps, and stressing collaboration, communication, stakeholder inclusion, and scientific support to work on those solutions to preserving orangutan habitat and orangutans.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. I mean, the common thread here between all your work seems to be working cross disciplines. And so, you know, I think it's been said several times that basically, you know, we can't separate humans from the environment. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you go about doing this. How do you actually collaborate and find partners, and how have those partnerships evolved over time? So I guess I'll just jump back to Kinnari, since it's been long since we heard from you.
So yeah, I mean, I think, Rhett, you just put it beautifully, that we work in systems change, right? All of these organizations work on trying to actually bring about holistic change. And the way to do that is to listen to local communities, they are the experts, and then to actually implement the solutions that they come up with. And our partnerships have sort of evolved over the years with what's called Yayasan Palung in Indonesia, Cheryl's organization. They've been doing education in the communities for many, many years. We've partnered with them on lots of different things that we do in the schools, for example. Carmeli then reached out to us because they were releasing wild orangutans at Bukit Raya, which is another national park in Indonesia. And they said, hey, we know that the communities are desperately asking for healthcare. We know that you have demonstrated at Gunung Palung how people log to pay for healthcare. And at Bukit Raya, I was talking to one woman, and she said to me, look, if anyone tells you that they have not logged to pay for healthcare, they're lying to you, because that is the only way here to get money for healthcare. And so, you know, Carmeli was hearing this, and so they asked, hey, can we partner together? We want to try to save this forest, but we know that's probably not possible without also addressing the healthcare needs. And then we're hoping eventually to also work with Vic and to work with Blue Ventures. They work in Madagascar. We now are also working there. They've also, for a long time, worked at this intersection of human and environmental health. And while we don't have exact programs on the ground yet working together, intellectually, we have learned so much from them, and we've really wanted to like study their program and our program and see if in slightly different ecosystems, if we're finding the same, it looks like we're finding the same thing. We'd really love to study that more in depth. That it's synergistic. 1 + 1 is 11, right? That when you, it's not that when you're working in multiple different parts of a system, you actually have even bigger impact.
So Carmela, I just thought with you, since you were just referenced, so could you speak a little bit about how your partnerships have evolved over the years?
Yeah, well, I think I have to start saying that the job that we have is so massive. There's no way that we can do it alone. Basically, we are going against all the odds. This is not a problem of the communities. This is not a problem of the Indonesians. This is not a problem of the NGOs. This is a problem of all of us. And we all have to contribute. It's not about the NGOs working on their own. It's about absolutely every single person. It's about absolutely every single government. We have a massive responsibility, and we couldn't do it if everybody else is not joining us. We need the private sector to join us as well. They are a very big part of the problem, but also this private sector is is there because we consume as well, and we buy products in our countries in the first world. I don't know. I think some people think that this is just a problem of the developing countries of whatever, somewhere far away, but it's not. It's really a problem that is we are starting to face, and and the pandemic is one example, and it's going to be more of that, and it's climate change, and it's all the problems they're coming to us because we are not respecting nature and the environment. So I think the only way to really stop this environmental crisis is to work together, absolutely every one of us.
Yes.
So Dika, you really operate at the intersection of human health and environmental health. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in terms of partnerships?
Yeah, I think I'd like to mention that, when you focus on problems, you will have more problems. But, when you focus on possibilities, you will have more opportunities. And I think that collaborations open more possibilities and opportunities to our work. As for the work that we're doing at ASRI, we work collaboratively with community as the center of our program development. And through radical listening that Kinnari has mentioned, we spend hundreds of hours sitting and listening to the community because they know exactly what the solutions are, but they're just missing resources or opportunities or knowledge. And that's when we and our expertise comes into actions. And we provide high quality and affordable healthcare, and then training in organic farming, just as a community asks us to do. And and this is also the foundations of developing our program. And sometimes we also think that what we do is actually so small compared to the scale of the problems that we faces. But if we all come together and act together, nothing is impossible. So yeah.
Thanks. And so Cheryl, it sounds like you started off in research and conservation, but as you do this work, you really started working with communities. So can you talk a little bit about that path and who you're collaborating with and what that looks like today?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to also just acknowledge, our important partners of IAR and ASRI, who are obviously here today as well. And I think that it's one thing that's kind of unique maybe about the Gunung Palung area is I feel like we have, multiple organizations, and we all kind of work together and find ways to collaborate. And I think that kind of makes us stand out a little bit compared to some other areas of the world where, we have various collaborations that we do with between our different organizations and all together. So I think that one of the important thing is also we are all kind of long-term participants in the region, and developing these relationships with local institutions and government bodies is really important. Like our education program, we work with the school boards, work with the principals, the teachers to develop those programs and be able to have access to the schools. Also our Customary forest program, really it's a program where we work with local villages to get them legal title to their land, because many of these villages, they have these traditional forests that they use, but they can be turned over to palm oil companies. So we have a legal team that works with them to get them that legal title, but that means that we need to work with government officials at the local level, the regional, the state, the national level. And so it's so important to have partners and collaborations at all those different levels. So basically everything we do, we sort of think about, where are the institutions that are responsible for that work, and try to work with them, or the sustainable livelihood groups. Well, it turns out that there are these Indonesian organizations, that even government organizations that support those kinds of groups. So identifying those and working with in collaboration, I think, is so important.
Thanks, Cheryl. So Vic, you're kind of a little bit of an outsider here in terms of like the ecosystem you work on, but the themes are very similar. And I just find Blue Ventures has had a really interesting path to, from where it started to where it is today. And so yeah, I'd love to hear about how you work with partners and how you collaborate with, various entities across all your initiatives.
Sure, thanks, Rhett. So in the context of talking about this intersection between human and environmental health, we support the replication of health environment programs, and the way those programs have been supported most successfully in Madagascar, at least, is through health environment partnerships. And these are partnerships between site-based conservation organizations and larger healthcare organizations. So, and those partnerships replicate this integrated health environment approach to community-based conservation. And that really is a win-win model we're finding. The way that plays out is that conservation organizations get to work with healthier, more engaged communities as a result of improvements in health. The healthcare providers get to leverage the operational infrastructure and good community relations of those site-based organizations to increase the reach of those health services, and sometimes on existing budgets. And of course, communities get more and more of their needs met, and as they get more of their needs met, they're better able to think long-term and engage in the longer-term ambitious work of natural resource management and community-based conservation. So that's one area where partnerships are vitally important to our work. And as we move outside of Madagascar, we support partners to adapt our ideas, our learning to their contexts. So that's another area where we work in partnership with other organizations. We find aligned partners who share our vision, and we support them with tools, resources, sometimes seed grants to replicate, or not replicate, but to adapt our ideas for their geographies. Does that answer your question, Brett?
Yeah, that's great. So I mean, healthcare is a common theme here, and access to healthcare is a huge social justice issue around the world, as is the quality of the environment in which we live. So I would love to hear from the panelists in terms of how can the nonprofit and environmental sectors do more to become more inclusive and achieve more racial justice. And again, Black Lives Matter is a huge issue here right now in the United States, but it's also rippling around the world. So I think this is a very timely subject to talk about. So Deacon, maybe I'll start with you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. About I think, we need to remember that racial is just one dimension of diversity. Diversity can show up in gender, sexual identity, nationality, socioeconomic status, educational attainment, and many more expressions of identity. Having a discussions on what identities everyone think that they project when they are, in this working environment, I think it's important. And to do this discussion in trusted environment can also break down barriers, and I think it can fortify one's ability to empathize with each other perspective on their own identity. This is something that still not talk a lot in Indonesia. And also making sure that different voices are heard, because Indonesia, especially, we are coming from different background, like hundreds of ethnic groups. So sometimes people feel less respected and less valued. So if we can make people feel, respected and valued, and we can create the environments that they can do their best work, I think it's where inclusion comes in.
Thanks, Tika. How about Kinnari? Would you be able to speak to that? So how can conservation become more inclusive?
So I'm the co-founder of ASRI with Hatla Nompasunggu, who's an Indonesian woman. And then I'm the founder of Health and Harmony in the US. And one of the things that we worked on really hard, and now ASRI is 100% Indonesian organization, and everyone on the board except for me is also Indonesian. But like Tika said, it's not just about just being Indonesian, right? It's about all kinds of layers of diversity. We worked on that in many, many, many different ways. And I also hold ourselves accountable. I feel like the United States team and the United States board needs to be much more diverse, and we need to address racial and equity in this country. And we are doing that to some degree, but we are not enough. And I'm well aware that that needs to happen. In Madagascar, again, we follow this model of 100% Malagasy staff. And we hope as we expand around the world that that will continue to be that model of working very closely with not only folks from that country, but diverse within that country. Yeah.
So since you mentioned Madagascar, Vic, do you have anything to say on this?
Well, hi, thanks, Ray. I mean, I agree with everything that everyone's saying. And something that, going back to something that Kinry said right at the beginning, is about listening. You know, listen to communities and put communities first. And if you listen to communities and you put communities first, those communities who are the stewards of our magnificent biodiversity, who rely on those natural resources for their livelihoods, if you put those communities first, you are, I think, addressing some of the key fundamental inequalities that Black Lives Matter speaks to. So, and because these are among the most vulnerable, marginalized, poor communities on our planet. So listen to communities, put them first, and uphold their rights. I think ultimately, without having articulated it yet, I think we all at some level believe in upholding the rights of the communities that we serve. And I think that's if we uphold the rights of those most vulnerable people, I think we're aligning ourselves very nicely with that agenda.
Great. Carmeli, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think racism is the other pandemic, right? I think there's racism in the whole world. It's not only in America, it's everywhere. And sometimes it's even in our subconscious. Sometimes we don't realize, we think that we are not racist, but we are being racist. And I think it's an effort that we have to do all together, and everybody that has to think of all the discrimination. And again, like Dika said, it's not only about race, it's about gender, it's about nationality, it's about so many issues that we actually have to really work hard to stop discriminating people, to work for the equality of all people. And especially when we are working with the community, sometimes it's also about social status as well. You know, it's something that is not related to even a religion or the color of the skin. It's just basically just this social status or the capacity to I mean, the economy, just basically based on the economy. And I think these are things that we need to be very careful in the work that we do, especially when we work with the communities, that we don't leave out all these people that are already marginalized because of their social status.
And Cheryl, so beyond conservation, you also work in the academic sector. Yeah, I'd love to hear whether you also see opportunities for things like scholarships and things like that to become more inclusive and you know, help bring more diversity to the conservation space.
Sure. Yes. So yeah, academically, I think that one of the programs we've developed is along with Orangutan Republic, who's our funder for this, is a scholarship program. So we've given 43 university scholarships so far to students in the local region from the 2 districts where we work, and giving them the opportunity to go to university where there isn't often a lot of opportunity there for this kind of outside scholarships. And that has really, I think, helped, you know, develop the sort of local leaders, the local conservation leaders, and really helping to sort of diversify that access to education. And we also have many students that we involve in our research site. So I believe our project has like 55 undergraduates that we've trained over the years. And I think that's so important, that it's not just sort of outside people coming in, that we are working to develop that local expertise and not just coming in and imposing our directives on people, but making, you know, bringing our resources to help develop that local knowledge, and especially, you know, working on every level, but also students and young people, and getting them the tools they need to actually be those conservation leaders in the future in Indonesia. So that's, I think, super important in trying to address this issue of social and racial economic inequities, and how to that's one thing that we can do to solve that.
So we do have a bunch of questions coming in from the audience, on this issue, which is obviously huge in conservation. So, I mean, just to summarize it a bit, what would it take to sort of obtain the critical mass within the conservation space and global climate space to achieve sort of this sustained international support that Black Lives Matter has achieved in recent weeks? And I mean, that said, I mean, Black Lives Matter really has gotten this critical mass only in the past few weeks, and really, it's unclear how sustained it will be. So, we've had it pop up. We've had these issues emerge in the past, but then we tend to go back to the status quo. And so, how do you actually propel and move this forward so it becomes something that is actually sustainable and leads to systemic change? So does anyone want to jump in on that, or should I call one of you?
I kind of want to jump in on that one. So there's this interesting research that shows when a nonviolent movement can get 3.5% of the population actively engaged in something, it wins, right? Like it can't change. I mean, it can't change. It can't not change, right? Like and that's a small percentage of the population. I mean, presumably a larger number of people support it, but when that number of people are really believe in something and are willing to actually do something, we do bring about change. And that is a slow movement, right? And I believe Black Lives Matter has tipped that point. And I also believe that climate change and the climate movement is, if not already tipped it, very, very close. And so basically, we are all called to get out there, if it's in the streets or if it's writing letters or if it's donating, if it's doing something. Because when we really are doing something, we can make that change happen. And it doesn't take everyone. So.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think it's about social justice. We really need to fight for social justice. It's because social justice is about climate change as well. Social justice is about everything. It's about race. It's about economic status. I think it's I don't know. How. I mean, we are powerful. We have that power. Like Dr. Kinnary says, if we really want to change things, we can do it. It's just that, we tend to think that there's nothing to fight for. And I think this is a mistake. I think we really need to fight for the good things that are still in, like the forests that are still left, and for the, we have to fight for the people that maybe don't have a voice as well. And I think it's probably really kind of like the tipping point, because if we don't act now, I think in a lot of things it will be too late very soon. For climate change, for instance, I think we are getting to the age, and I think it's the time that we have to act.
Just to expand on this a little bit. So one of the things that I've noticed over the past, I guess it would be about 7 years, something like that, is in the conservation space, there's been a much greater recognition of the importance of land rights. So local people and indigenous people securing land rights as an actual mechanism for driving conservation outcomes. And so there's very much a social justice aspect to that. And so I'd be curious as to whether any panelists have thoughts on the emergence of sort of that social justice issue as a key fundamental part of conservation efforts now.
I could speak on that. Right. So I think that that's key, and I think that preserving, like for example, I mentioned this Customary forest program. It's about giving the indigenous people that access to their land, so they can decide for themselves what to do with it. And they can decide to not have palm oil, for example, was one of the main decisions that is made, but that these villages are making. But giving them that opportunity to to address that. So people what happens is that they have these forests, which for many, generations they have been farming sustainably, or with like fruit crop trees, for example, or extracting resources to make sustainable products from, but sustainably, managing these forests, that they don't have the legal title of that. And so it allows them to have that. So I think that's really, really key. I think also working across landscapes. So I think like, as you mentioned, the conservation space in the last 10, 20 years, more of a recognition of that it's not just about making borders and making boundaries. It's really about working across protected and unprotected areas, and working with these local communities and helping them be part of the solutions, and not just saying here's the border and stay out. We have people who are already living inside the borders of national parks or inside protected areas, so working with them to find those solutions, and the solutions have to come from within the people, that it's not just outside organizations or government, local, even government organizations within the country imposing those rules on people.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add on that our job as the organizations maybe try to push government to hurt on what community needs and what community asks. And I think also, for example, in Gunung Palung National Park, just what Cheryl has mentioned about the border, and we found some community has land inside of the national park. Then how can we also actively bring these communications into the table, and then find the win-win solutions, for conserving the nature, and also supporting community, because this community, some of this community, they've been sitting on that land for ages, and then the size of the size, and or maybe the border, it's expanding, and then before they're not part of the national park, and now they're part of the national park. So I think government in national level also have been thinking about that, and then finding solutions where to grant it rights to community to be to access on their land if the status it's part of the national park.
Thanks, Tika. So beyond Black Lives Matter and the social justice and racial discrimination issues, I mean, another huge problem right now is COVID. I mean, that's the other pandemic, right? So, and one of the things we've been hearing from the ground is that one of the challenges is COVID is some of the big international NGOs have pulled out of regions. And so essentially it's created this vacuum in areas where there aren't long-term relationships with local communities. And so, Vic, you mentioned that a key tenet of your work is establishing these long-term relationships where you're going to stick around for a long time and be part of that community. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, what that looks like, and
Sure.
I guess how COVID fits into that as well.
Sure, Rhett. So, really big question. So what we see among the coastal communities in Madagascar and in parts of East Africa where we're also working is that actually the livelihood impacts of COVID-19 are far more significant than the health impacts right now. As a result of lockdown, fishing communities are experiencing a disruption to their distribution chains for fish. So they are not able to sell their fish or don't get a good price for their fish anymore. And that's coupled with the fact that the commodity prices are going up. So they're having to pay more to buy their essential supplies. And that's before the health impacts even kick in. So what we're trying to do is to do our best to ensure fishers get a fair price for their fish. Support fishers to get to earn an income through alternative livelihoods, where, if that's possible. That might be aquaculture, that might be terrestrial alternative livelihoods such as beekeeping, and when necessary, support the distribution of emergency relief in the form of funding to plug the shortfall in income from fishing. Now, what we are seeing in some areas as a result of this collapse in the global fisheries, or this shift in the global fisheries ecosystem, we are seeing increasing destructive fishing practices. We're seeing coastal communities really being pushed deeper into poverty, and there are no simple solutions for this. There are no simple solutions, but we think that really supporting communities to continue to get a good price for their fish, supporting communities to continue to try and protect their marine resources and use them as sustainably as possible, is going to give them the best chance of surviving in the long term. And also, we feel fortunate that we can provide both a livelihoods and a health response to the challenges communities face right now. So we try and do both in tandem, because we see both of those as important. That was a bit of a rambling answer, Rhett, but I hope that was a reasonable response.
It made sense. You covered the bases. Does anyone else want to speak to the COVID impacts?
Yeah, I kind of want to jump in here too, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that it's, I don't know if this is very much on the news in the West, but I think this, all these people that have lost their jobs, and especially in the tourism sector, but in all sectors across, basically the lower range of the societies, are all these people that have lost their jobs and that now are shifting to activities like illegal logging, illegal mining, hunting. In just the last couple of months here, we have seen a massive increase in all these illegal activities. Because, I tell you, and this is one of the problems, most people who are doing illegal logging or illegal mining, they don't do it as a choice. They do it because there is no choice, because they don't have any other alternative. And now with all this economic crisis across the globe, basically so many more people are not having any other alternative. And I think this is a problem that is only starting now, and that we're going to see it increasing in the next few months. And I think this is something that we really need to think about, how we're going to give solutions to this problem.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been thinking about this a lot, and designing a conservation stimulus program, right? Because this, exactly like Carmeli said, when people have no other choice, when they don't have enough income to survive, or when they don't have access to healthcare. So we know lots of people will often log forest or do destructive fishing practices in order to get enough money for healthcare. So as COVID, comes through, that can also be an enormous issue. So one of the things that we're doing, and Dika can talk more about this, is providing direct stimulus to farmers and to people. We call them inactive loggers, people who've been shifting away from logging but still own a chainsaw. Those guys we feel like are the most dangerous folks, right? So we're trying to buy those chainsaws as quickly as we can. And also just, help folks who've already shifted away from logging, help farmers buying their produce, buying their rice at fair prices, distributing it to people who are really on the margins. So that's, we're trying to work on a conservation stimulus program so that people don't have to turn to the forest or to fishing.
And also in addition to that, to those who have been transitions into the new business, we also ask them to start to planting seedlings, and then we will support them monthly, as long as they care for the seedlings. And by the end of the program, then we will also get the seedlings, and then they don't have to be worried how to feed their family, because then they will get support every month by caring of the seedlings.
And we actually need more seedlings. We're working on different partnerships for reforestation projects. So this is a way for us to get lots of people growing seedlings for us. Yeah.
Can I add also that in addition to those very important issues, I think, that are affecting everybody in terms of the people, also brings up another connection that we all just made about the importance of having locally, local people doing these things, is that then these programs can continue. So if your organization's only, internationals, then they go home, then something happens and you can't keep the organization going. So the fact that our organizations are run by local people, then means that we're not, reliant on, internationals to sort of run things. But also it kind of, the COVID problem brings up the issue of, rainforest encroachment and fragmentation of these landscapes pushes wildlife to get in contact with humans, and it makes them vulnerable to poaching, but also this increased disease risk transfer between animals and humans, in both directions. And this wildlife trade for medicine, consumption, and pets, it causes this ideal breeding ground for disease transmission. And I know that Austria and I are, of course, both working on those fronts, and we are as well, and looking at wildlife crime investigations and the illegal pet trade, and how that sort of segues with human health, and it can affect human health.
Yeah, I just want to put a real plug in for Yayasan Palung. They have done some amazing work in taking down some of these networks of wildlife traders. Really good work.
Thank you.
So we have quite a few questions coming in from our audience, and so I wanted to jump into one of these that's come up quite a few times. So basically, the question is, how do we reconcile development? So that, which would include possibly economic growth, but just generally improving local living standards like healthcare and education, while ensuring forests and biodiversity are well maintained. So what are some of the strategies to both systematically empower local communities with knowledge and infrastructure, so they can catch up with their peers in other areas, but also retain the power to manage and protect their own forests? And so that's the question. That's a pretty big question. I think this is also an opportunity, and it could be kind of helpful for people to illustrate for folks, if you have a specific story of impact, along these lines. So is there, a specific case where your work has, helped address those questions?
I'll jump in. Since no one else seems to be jumping. So the first thing I want to say is that I think one of the biggest problems on our planet is that we have a false understanding. We have this belief that human development is in conflict with the environment, and that we have to choose between one or the other. But actually, that's just not true. Around Gunung Palung, we have shown that there has been a 90% drop in logging households. There's been an increase in income and a 67% drop in infant mortality. Humans are doing better, economically better, for whole well-being better, and the forest is better protected. And if we want to think about all of our well-being in the long run, there's no way around it. And I just think we have to always think about these solutions where humans are thriving and the natural ecosystem is thriving. And that's really possible, right? We've demonstrated it's possible. All of the organizations in this group are demonstrating that that is possible. So I'll tell you a small story. So there's a man in our village. I'll call him Pat Sofian. That's not his name, but I'm protecting his identity. So he is my neighbor. And when I lived in the village for a very long time, this is him right here. And so he cut down 60 trees to pay for a C-section right when we were starting our program. And that, he had no other choice. He loves the forest. He wanted to protect it, but he had no choice. And just his financial well-being was really threatened. So then over the years, we worked with him, and he's actually someone who doesn't own land. So many of the people in our community shifted to organic agriculture, which is what they asked for the training in. But he owned a chainsaw, and he had been logging since he was very young. And we actually started this chainsaw buyback program. We bought his chainsaw, and he and his wife started this little store. And they sell a lot of the produce that a lot of the other previous loggers are now producing, and lots of their rice and things like that. And he was actually the first person to pay back his, it's a joint investment. He invests his chainsaw, we buy it. And then we also invest some funds into his business, he and his wife's business. And they were the first people to pay it back. So that's just a really cool example of how you can have mutual thriving. Who's next?
Yeah, maybe one thing I wanted to say is, in terms of protecting the environment and the nature, there's not a choice. I mean, it's not that we can choose one or the other. It's like we can have all the money in the world, but if we don't protect our environment, we can't survive. I mean, we see it with this pandemic, right? I mean, it's about health. There's nothing more important than health. And you can see it here in this panel, everybody, we are all talking about the health of the communities. If we start with the health of the communities, we have to think about the health of the environment. There's no other way.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the fisheries sector, we see that, well-managed fisheries leads to improve fisher income, improve nutrition amongst fishing families, and healthier marine ecosystems. So, which is why we put coastal communities at the front of marine conservation, because no one stands to benefit more from healthy marine ecosystems than the people who live in that area. And so we see it for ourselves, just as everyone else is really beautifully describing. So we see the same thing in the marine sector.
Vic, can you tell, your stories about the octopus are so amazing. Can you just share that story? Sorry, you're on mute. Wait, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'll keep it really brief. So in the southwest of Madagascar, the community's most economically important fishery was the octopus fishery. But because of overfishing, it was collapsing precipitously. And the good news about octopus is it grows very quickly. And so octopus protection leads to very quick recovery in octopus populations. So we work with communities to close off a small area of their fishing ground. They chose 10% of their fishing ground for octopus fishing for 3 months. So they could fish for everything else everywhere. They could fish for octopus everywhere else except for that small area of fishing ground. During that 3 months, they experienced no loss in income from fishing. When they reopened the octopus closure, that 3-month temporary closure, they were catching octopus 700% bigger than they'd been catching before the closure, the likes of which they'd not seen for a generation. They doubled their income from fishing for an entire month after reopening the closure, and that catalyzed the idea that marine management pays. And so we've seen that replicated literally hundreds of times across Madagascar and other parts of the coastal tropics now. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Healthy marine ecosystems leads to, healthier communities, more affluent communities. Does that answer your question, Gunnar? Thanks.
I mean, so points you touched on are reasons for hope. And so, one question that has come up a few times is, why should we have hope, or is there a reason for hope? So, along those lines, are there other stories that we should be helpful, should give us hope about, restoring forests or conserving forests or protecting, charismatic wildlife or helping local communities?
I think we're talking about human health. I think making healthcare more accessible and affordable, it's one of the solutions. One of the story that we have here, we receive non-cash payment, and our patients can pay with seedlings, with manure, with handicraft, and then for areas that are very remote, we usually go there and then provide healthcare like once in a month. So making healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone, I think it's one of the solutions as well. We receive seedlings, and then those seedlings that we receive from patients, we then planting them in the national park in our reforestation program. So it's like win-win solutions, for health and also for the health of environment.
And if I could jump in a second, I think that everyone on this panel, if you read their stories, it's an essay on hope, because I think all of us, our stories, are hopeful stories. I think of hope being an active process. I talk about active hope, taking steps to create the world you wish for, and so it's not a passive thing being hopeful. It's active. I choose to be hopeful. I choose to work towards the world I want to be part of. And I think that's true of all of us here.
Beautifully said.
I can share one of our stories with, and I think a lot of the hope is, these individual people that inspire us. I mean, I've also seen people who were illegal loggers, then who now have become conservationists who are working for our organization that, they didn't, as was mentioned, people don't necessarily want to be illegal loggers, but that's the way they, sometimes the only opportunity they have. But one of the kind of people who's inspired me the most is this woman whose name is Ibu Ida. And she has, she is a woman that learned how to make these pandanus mats from her mother as a child, weaving these mats, and these are made from sustainable forest products. And she, has really become a leader for conservation. And she recently actually won a Conservation Hero Award. She realized that the key to keeping these products going was to help preserve the forest and help protect the forest. And so she has, goes down on her own initiative, visits villages, other villages, visits schools, and teaches them the importance of the connection between protecting their forests and protecting those resources. And so, individuals like that are so inspiring to see what can be done and how one person can make a huge difference.
I also wanted to maybe share the story. We rescue orangutans that, we all know that there is still like massive areas of forest being lost in Indonesia. So when we rescue orangutans, we have to rehabilitate them in our center, and then we release them back to the wild. And we are using this area in a national park where ASRI and Health in Harmony are also working with us, with the communities. It's a very remote area where people don't really have much opportunities because there's, they are too remote, and they struggle. They really struggle. And in that area, we have become the biggest employers for the local communities. We have nearly 200 people working with us in monitoring the orangutans after they are released. So basically, after the release, we have to ensure that the orangutans are healthy and that they are being able to survive. And for that, we are using local people. And basically, they go from cutting trees or hunting to just follow orangutans in the forest and become the best ambassadors for the orangutans. And I think that's a beautiful story for all these people because, first of all, they have a much better job. They can maintain their families. They can ensure that they have a plate of food for their children, but also they are protecting the environment at the same time. And I think it's there are many ways in which we can live together with the environment and economic development. These orangutans, moreover, they are now breeding and they are now being able to breed into the new generation of orangutans that are being born in this forest. They are going to become basically, these orangutans were extinct in this area, and now with these orangutans breeding, we're basically bringing back a population of orangutans that was once extinct. So, we are basically completing the whole cycle and helping the communities with that as well.
So a common theme that's coming up in the questions is, given the scale of problems that we're facing, these are great solutions, but how do we actually bring them or go to scale with them so we can actually start to address these challenges? And, as an add-on to that, how do we get funders to get behind these strategies and be supportive?
Hi, this is Vic. I'll kick off if I may. So I think it's important to remember that change is non-linear, and that yes, the size of the problem can feel very daunting, but also we experience, as we've experienced with Black Lives Matter, we experienced dramatic non-linear change. The movement started several years ago, right? So I think we have to hold on to that belief, and I think the hardest thing I've ever had to do with my work for Blue Ventures is think about how to scale, if I'm allowed to use that term. It's really, really tough. It requires us to think really, really hard about what it is we're trying to replicate, scale, support replication of. It requires us to think about who's going to do that work, and requires us to think about who's going to fund that work. So I think those are the questions we've got to answer. What are we trying to scale? Let's get that really clear, and let's think about the different contexts within which that might need to be adapted. Let's think about who's going to do that and how we're going to support them to do that in a way that gives them ownership and everything else that they need to do that work or whatever it might be, and who's going to pay for that. And if we're talking about operating at scale, then you have to open the door to funding at scale, and that might be bilaterals, might be multilaterals, or whoever. So those are the questions I think we need to ask. We need to hold on to the fact that growth is nonlinear.
And I would also say that change is local. So, and like you say, it's nonlinear. So for me, it's about scaling radical listening. It's about listening to local communities about what the solutions are. And knowing that everywhere, and then match, okay, this community's got a problem with fisheries. Whoop, call in Blue Ventures. Oh, this one's got a problem with this. We've got just the expertise here, right? And then really also helping, exactly as you said, Vic, helping donors understand and individuals understand that we are saying thank you to people who are guarding the health of the entire planet. And when you say, when we say, okay, these are relatively small projects, sort of, right? Gunung Palung National Park has as much carbon in it as 14 years of carbon emissions from San Francisco, right? It is no joke to protect these areas. And there are tipping points, right? So the more you protect the forest, the more forest gets protected, right? So we just really have to think about this as we are all partnered in this around the world. We have to think about systems change, and we have to think about following the experts. And the experts are the local communities. So we ask them what the solutions are, we trust them, and we support those initiatives. And we support systems change, which means lots of different things that may seem unconnected to you, to any of us from outside, are super connected on the inside.
6 months ago, who would have connected public health with rainforest conservation the way that we do now, right? So I think now we have a receptive audience when it comes to talking about systems change and working in an interconnected way.
Yeah, and I also want to add that, I think there's no small change, every change counts, and every change is important. And, we are here just a small number of individuals, right? Only 5 of us. And the change that we're making is massive. You just multiply that for whatever many millions of people in this planet, If like everybody did something, you know how powerful that will be, So it's just, yeah, we are here. We are all pretty small organizations. And I think, we are really making a change. And I think if we can replicate this for so many more organizations and so many more people, yeah, I think we can actually do it.
Yeah, I also want to add that, not everybody can be in the front lines of conservation, but this doesn't mean that people can't help with these efforts. And I think we've learned from this panel that there's so many good, effective conservation models in place, and a lot can be done to helping to support these kind of efforts to maximize their potential. And there's a lot of individuals can do, even if they're not, on the ground in these countries and working to save a rainforest or oceans.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. We only have a few more minutes. So I'm gonna call out a few questions, and then folks can decide which they want to answer. So one that's come up is how do you measure the impact of your work? And I would add on to that, which is another question around technology. So does technology have a role in what you're doing? Another question is around the demonization of caretakers of the environment or environmental defenders. Are those issues that you're having to deal with in your work? And then on sort of the forest restoration front specifically, Would anyone like to speak to that? So I'll just throw those three out there, and just being mindful that we have about 10 minutes left. I want to save 5 minutes at the end for wrap up.
Dika, do you want to jump in and talk about? Oh, go. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought I addressed the issue about technology, and also how that segues with measuring our effectiveness. So one of the things that we've been doing the last couple of years is working on actually using drones for conservation. And so using drones to count orangutan nests. So the way we count orangutan densities is they make a new nest almost every night. And so we can use those as a measure of individuals, because it's very hard to go out and actually count individuals. And so we've been doing this this project where we do ground nest surveys and then simultaneous drone surveys to develop a method to use drones as a way to assess population density, because those can be done much faster, eventually, much cheaper, and they can cover much wider areas. And so that's a way that we actually can partner with these drone companies to use that technology, and then to use that to see, how well are we doing, because ultimately those of us working in orangutan conservation are looking to see how many animals are there, right? So measuring population density is critical, and thus we can use that to see, what areas that we're working in, what areas are showing recovery, which ones aren't, and so using that technology. So that's one example of how those two things can relate.
Anyone else want to jump in? Technology, measuring impact, demonization of environmental defenders.
I'll
Dika,
jump in.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I
No,
was
go
wondering
ahead,
if you want to talk about reforestation.
Yeah, in terms of reforestation that we did, well, we use satellite imagery as well, to see how it changes over time after we did for at least 30 years of interventions right now. So how does it affect the national park that we're working with at the moment? And then we also seen from the camera traps if there's any animal that actually pass the area of our reforestations, because eventually when we do our reforestations work, is eventually to create habitat, or at least close to the natural habitat that it was before. So we also did monitoring every plants or seedlings that we planted every 6 months for the first 2 years, and after that every year, to ensure the survival rate. And we have a survival rate of minimum 70%. So most of the plants or seedlings that we planted are actually alive and are doing well. And yeah, I think that's all from reforestation side. And we're also working on this resilience, impact that we would like to measure as well, where we compare the sites of our intervention and then other side, and compare it to other side that hasn't been done or been touched by interventions of our organizations.
Hi, is it all right if I jump in quickly to talk about evaluation?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So thank you. So as well as having real clarity on our outcome measures or impact measures for our conservation work, whether it's orangutan density, forest cover, whatever, because we're all working at a systems level, when we're evaluating our work, we need to use a methodology that that can deal with the complexity of working in a multi-sectoral, complex, messy way in open systems. And, and that's going to be a mixed methods approach to evaluation that helps us to identify not just whether something's worked, but how something's worked. And not just identified our expected outcomes, but our unexpected outcomes. And so first we need to have a really clear idea of our theory of change. How are our outputs leading to how do we think our outputs lead into the outcome we want to see? Get clear on that. Okay, sure, have good metrics for measuring the outcome, and think broadly about how we're really going to evaluate your work, and ask the question of how the work is having its effect, as well as what the effect is. This is the complexity and messiness, basically, of the work that we do.
Does anyone else want to jump in on those topics? If not, so we can, we only got a couple minutes left. I would like to ask go ahead.
I'll just add one thing. So one of the things that we did with Stanford is a paper is just about to come out that looks at Gunung Palung, which is our first pilot location and where both IAR and Sun Palung also work. And we compared the trajectory of forest loss compared to all the other national parks in Indonesia. And just counting carbon, which of course is not all one should count, but just counting carbon, the difference between Gunung Palung and other national parks in Indonesia was worth $65 million worth of money. These things work. It makes an enormous impact. And that's just counting carbon. It's not counting orangutans, it's not counting biodiversity, it's not counting the effects of the water flow and, all that's, and the health, right? So.
Thanks, Customary. Look forward to seeing that. So we only have a couple minutes left. Just wanted to present all the panelists with one last question, which is, what is one thing that we can do today to make a real impact? And in answering this question, I would say thinking both about protecting the environment, but also inclusion and racial justice as it relates to these broader issues.
Yeah, maybe I go back to the social justice, fight for social justice.
Dika, do you have thoughts? I think you're on mute, Dika.
Oh yeah. I would say try to paying it forward, because this rainforest has done many things to us, so try to pay it forward by, supporting or donating or whatever it is that you believe in to to support any local organizations or organizations that support work for rainforests or for any cause that you might believe in. So yeah.
Vic?
I'm going to go broad and ethereal and just say, remember every day that we are all connected. We are all connected to each other. We are connected to our ecosystems. So when you're protecting your ecosystem, you're protecting yourself and your home and your brothers and your sisters. So you're doing it. Yeah. So remember that thought every day, and that should guide everything we will do.
Cheryl?
Well, I would say that knowledge is power. And we can use that knowledge not only to address conservation issues, but also social justice issues. And that what you can do today that costs you nothing is to learn about these issues, learn about rainforests, learn about social issues, learn about actually the connection between the different problems, that epidemics we've talked about today. And that, spread that knowledge to those around you. And that's, it just takes one person to bring information to the people that they know. And I think that that's something that we can all do, that we should be doing more of.
And I'll just close it up by say thank you. And for me, that means actually donate to these incredible organizations. Donate directly to the communities who are protecting the rainforest upon which all of our well-being survive. It is actually absolutely dependent. And I just told you about that $65 million, right? That's a gift that just one small set of communities are giving to the world, right? By protecting this forest. Can we give them a small thank you in return? Help support their livelihoods, help support, buy chainsaws, help support their healthcare, help, return orangutans to the wild, help these fisheries, help people have thriving lives and thriving forest and a thriving planet. Together we can do it. And your energy of a gift of money is actually a beautiful, beautiful gift. And we can't do it without it. So partner with us.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and thank you to our audience for watching. And happy World Rainforest Day, and thanks for everything you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.